want to talk
I
about?
want to be sure we get to this because I'm one of the biggest James Bond fans on the planet. I get the sense that you're up there too. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about the series. So I probably got into Bond when I was a teenager, and I just became obsessed with him. And I probably have seen all the pre-Craig movies at least 20 or 30 times. So it's like I'm pretty
Oh,
familiar
that's a
with
serious Bond
the
fan.
series. Yeah. So I want to, there's a number of things we can discuss. First, I just got to get off my chest because I think that you've made your public, let's say, disdain. Is that too strong of a word for the Craig movies? Pretty
No,
out
it's not.
there. So what's up? Why do you hate the Daniel Craig Bond movies so much?
um, I don't know about hate. I just find them boring,
Okay.
incredibly boring. You were talking about people acting up a masculinity instead of actually being masculine, and I see that with the Craig Bond movies. There's too much of an effort to try and make him look really tough and hard. And it's like I prefer the old Bonds where Bond was having a laugh, and I love the Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton era. Um, yeah, there's so much to go into about that. Yeah, but I find the new ones are too fake. Ironically, they try to be more realistic, but they're not more realistic. They're just as stupid as the old ones. But they try to put this veneer of realism on it that isn't there. The plots are just as stupid. The characters are just as stupid. The fights are just as unrealistic. But in the old movies, they embraced it, and they didn't lie about it, and they acknowledged to the audience and said, look, we know this is absolute garbage. We know this is juvenile, teenage, masculine, sexual fantasy, and it could never happen in the real world. But we are going to fulfill those deep fantasies that you've got on the most brilliant level. We're going to take the fantasy beyond what even you would do with it. And I love how they did that because for me that felt very honest. They made the movies unrealistic, but I think that was honest because the fantasies that we men have that were being fulfilled by the movies, those fantasies are unrealistic to begin with. So I think the more mature approach is to present it unrealistically on the screen. And the new movies try to pretend that it's not pretend. Yeah.
They do have this like grittiness and this realism. We don't have exploding pens and helicopters and suitcases and women with ridiculous names and things like that. But
I don't think they are more realistic, by the way. I don't. I think they're just as stupid.
Yeah, I think you can definitely make that case that they're not more realistic. I do think that for most of the series, they are catering to the male fantasy. It's like, who would want to be this dashing secret agent who lives a life of adventure and beds all these beautiful women and saves the world? I mean, it's like, sign me up for that. That sounds fantastic. And there seemed to be some sort of like crisis of conscience about this that happened I think the first signs we see of it are in GoldenEye, which I watched a couple of years ago. A lot of people that are my age have this romanticized view of GoldenEye, I think because of the video game that came up at that time, around the time when we were kids.
Game. Yeah.
And so we love GoldenEye. But when you go back and watch it, it's actually kind of depressing. And a lot of that movie, they spend just like flagellating Bond for his misogynism, for his, being out of date. Yeah, the Moneypenny, the new young Moneypenny isn't going to flirt with him, so she's too good for his advances, and it's like we can't have fun anymore in GoldenEye, and it was like we have to stop the superficial male fantasy that we've been indulging in for too long, and not only that, we have to enact some sort of penance on men, and I actually think that's where we're getting within the Craigs, because I do think that every actor who played Bond certainly brought something unique to the role. And I think that's also not just a representation of who he was as a person or an actor, but also of the times. And I think what Craig brought to Bond was that we hadn't really seen in Bond before, is that I can take it. I can take whatever you throw at me and still stand up. Like, I'm tougher than anything else. It's like, you couldn't think Roger Moore, I don't think, could really get the crap beaten out of him. Maybe, you know, he'd probably keep a stiff British upper lip, but like Craig is just, no matter what you throw at me, no matter if you
well, it's the same with Connery, by the way. I mean,
like,
a lot of people think of Connery as being a tough Bond, but actually, when you see him with his shirt off in the movies, he was just as skinny as Roger Moore. He just had a hairy chest, but a hairy chest doesn't stop bullets or punches, does it? You know, so.
yeah, I mean, we had Bond like running through drywalls in Casino Royale and just like being this almost this unhinged weapon of like pure id and destruction that needs to kind of be reined in Casino Royale to become a more targeted, effective assassin, basically. But I do think that the Craigs are kind of a, I mean, we're talking about how to be a man in a modern society that kind of doesn't believe in men, that thinks that men have done all kinds of bad things in the past and not only maybe shouldn't be in power anymore, but maybe need to be brought to bear for those transgressions, those historical transgressions. And that Bond as the man who gets things done and is tough is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Like you see that in the exchange with Q in Casino Royale, and they made Q into this this young nerdy character. We also find out in No Time to Die that he's gay, and he basically says that, you know, I can do more damage on my laptop than you could in your entire life. You're just, someone needs to pull the trigger every once in a while, and so we're using you. You're just like this brute animal. You don't really have a place. And you also see that in the storyline in like what is it, Spectre, where who is it? C is trying to take over MI6. It's like the whole MI6 empire is, we don't need this anymore. We're globalists. We need to move beyond this parochial view of nationality. It's just like the whole thing about that Bond is coming up against in the Craig films is you are irrelevant. Like that just gets told to him over and over and over again. And over and over and over again, he shows that he's not. Like, I think that's the male fantasy today, which is men live in this society where they're kind of being told in so many ways that they are increasingly irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, we're not.
That's a good take on it. I like that. Yeah.
And Craig's, and he kind of takes it on the chin every time. It's like the exchange with Vesper on the train when he just like smiles as she skewers him, and no one really fucking believes in him, but he gets the job done. And almost everybody comes around and respects him in the end. And I think that's the new male fantasy. Not that I'm going to go and bed, 30 different women and have a bunch of cool cars. It's that like, I can still be a man and be respected and celebrated for doing so. What do you think?
I can see that reading of it. For me, it doesn't make the movies work for me because in order to be respected as a man, you have to save the world and fucking go through all kinds of pain and beating people up and fighting and stuff.
But that's the male fantasy version of it.
Does that mean a woman doesn't have to go through that? Does that mean some other person from some other group doesn't have to do that? Why is it only a male has to do that?
It's a good point.
So yeah, it's not a message that I agree with. But I also never got the feeling I didn't see Spectre, but I saw the other ones. I never got the feeling in any of those movies that he ended up respected at the end at all. For me, the endings were always just flat and dull. Well, he died in the last one, didn't he?
Well, he does, and then they toast him, and everybody's very sad. Vesper comes around after he's.
Everybody acts very sad.
Maybe you're right.
It's the difference, isn't it?
I saw some interesting takes. One thing that I do think was great about the Craig series is that really for the first time you see continuity between the films, which I think was something that the series as a whole really missed out on. Like, I think you see Sylvia Trench for 2 seconds in From Russia with Love, and she's the girl that you meet at the Baccarat table in Dr. No. But other than that, other than like Q and Moneypenny, and there's like no, every movie it takes place in like this almost
in its own time capsule,
hermetically sealed universe. Exactly. And I think that
I do kind of like that though, because I love the fact that with all the old movies, you can just say, which Bond movie do I feel like watching today? And you can dive into any one of them, and it's a complete whole experience on its own. Whereas the new ones is, yeah, it's more like a series. I prefer the old style, but I can understand that there are appeals to having a continuous story between them all. But there's some interesting things that come out of the disconnected nature between the old Bond films. It's almost like they're all remakes of the same story, you know.
Yeah, the formula for sure.
Yeah, definitely the same formula. They're all remade lots and lots of different ways. And you kind of always knew what the outcome was going to be. But there's things about that I found really fascinating. And one of them is, if you looked at them as being continuous, a continuous Bond story, what happens to each woman he gets with at the end of each movie before the next movie? I was actually thinking I might do a video on this at some point.
I think you talked about this in one of your episodes. You have a little pet theory.
Probably did, yeah. I mean, does he kill them off? Does he is he a serial killer? Does he just go and sneakily dump them? Is there some woman broken-hearted crying her eyes out somewhere while he's off adventuring in the world meeting the next girl?
You don't often see that. You see that, I think, in Tomorrow Never Dies, where he goes up to Terry Hatcher's character and she just slaps him. And I think this is the first time in a film where Bond gets reintroduced to a woman that he has seduced in the past. You don't usually see that in the films.
Yeah.
And then he succeeds in seducing her again. So I guess also.
Yeah, of course he does. Yeah. There's always an excuse to let Bond off with being a naughty boy, isn't there? You know, it was usually like he sleeps with one girl or two girls early in the movie, and they get killed by the bad guys. Sometimes Bond even slips up and accidentally puts them in danger, and they get killed anyway. But then he gets to be with the woman he really wants in the movie at the end, and he doesn't have to have the guilt of dumping the other ones because they got killed.